with the issue to a county board agenda, which is where we do vote and do motions and so forth. So committees that will have interacting with us today on the first issue, border-to-border route, will be the Public Safety and Transportation Committee that's discussed this on 2 occasions. There was one session here with Andrew Brown with the DNR and with the Public Safety and Transportation members. Also, our Soil and Water Conservation District Board has discussed this issue, so I'll be asking for a brief report from the Vice Chair, Stan Tull, on that. So any questions from anyone on that? Yes?
Which statute refers to committee of the whole?
I believe it's called under work sessions, yes.
Okay.
And it is common in counties to have committee of the whole meetings as well. My understanding is the statutes in regard to the definition of a work session by county boards. So we'll start off with a border-to-border issue, and we've got quite a few documents that were sent to us, the minutes from a public safety and transportation meeting in December, where there was some minutes taken as well as some statements made in writing to that. And then we had some information passed on to us from our county highway engineer, and Kristen Foster, and she could not be here today. I don't see Pat Eliason here as well, so, but I know Mike Keyport is here if we would have to talk to someone else other than those that are up here at this time. Commissioner DeShaw and I also serve on the Public Safety and Transportation Committee. So I'll call on Stan Tull, he's Vice Chair, if you could make some comments about your discussions and in regard to border-to-border. Thank you.
Right here, all right?
Yeah, or if you want to go to a microphone.
It doesn't matter to me. Am I loud enough to be able to hear you then?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Will it be on video, excuse me?
He won't be on video sitting there.
No, but I mean,
prefer it that way.
but can he be heard on video?
He may be able to be heard on video,
Okay.
otherwise he can sit up here by Bob and use that microphone.
Well, this is going to be really quick. January 2nd, Soil and Water had a discussion based on border-to-border trails. We had discussed it a couple of meetings earlier. 3 motions were made during that meeting. 2 of them failed, 3-2 vote, 3-2 vote. The third motion was to table it until the commissioners have made their decision so that we know if we have an issue here or not. That passed unanimously. All 3 motions were made by 3 different individuals. So our stand is, you guys make a decision. We'll support you once the decision is made, whether we need to or not.
Okay.
It's just that simple.
Okay. Thank you, Stan. Appreciate it. As we get into the material that was sent to us, I'd just like to make a few comments as chair that we'll try to keep this informal. It's not a regular board meeting, so I don't think you have to speak through the chair. We'll try to interact with each other. I would ask that we do not interrupt each other, that if someone is speaking, they have a right to continue speaking, and that we refrain from personal comments as well as, going off topic. We'd like to have the topic addressed. So if the chair needs to get a point of order or a point of privilege, then I would use that, but hopefully not. So let's start with, I tried to go through this material in such a way that we could structure it, and I hope you forgive me, but I like a little structure in how we go through things, and I did make some decisions about how we could go in order with this. So I'll I'll just go through the information that was in the packet in a little different order so that I think we go from more general topics to some of the more specific language that was in the form of resolutions and so forth. So with that, please sort of indicate by a hand or looking at me if you want to speak at that time, but I don't think you have to speak through the chair. We'll try to keep that informal. So just looking at a memo from Rena Rogers, a border-to-border route, there's a summary there, and I don't think there's any question or any concerns about that unless someone wants to comment, but if not, we'll just go on. We also have looked before at the border-to-border touring route from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. There was two pages in there about that, and I think we've looked at that before, especially with our conversation with Andrew Brown, but are there any questions or comments or concerns about that?
Well, I just, on the memo, Rena, it says all county board members were present, and I think there's just two.
No, when we did the
With
Skype
Andrew
meeting, I
Brown.
think you were all there.
Dave, you weren't there.
Right, I was not there.
I'm sorry then, I stand
Oh.
corrected. Four.
But you were freaking me out.
You don't remember that?
This was December.
There were a lot of people.
November, excuse me, okay.
So November of 2019.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so four out of five then.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's right, I guess.
I am sorry, because I would have, I guess, very much liked to have been there if everyone else was there, so.
It was supposedly a meeting for the Public Safety Transportation meeting, committee, but I think it ended up being all commissioners asking questions and members of the public as well asked questions.
Okay. Clarification. Heidi? Commissioner
Noticed
DeKirk.
several times that we could all be there.
Thank you.
Then let's go on to
It's okay.
document from the Department of Natural Resources. Any discussion on that, or we'll move on? And here again, I'm just going through what we received in our PDFs. So then we'll move into the Public Safety and Transportation Committee minutes that were in the packet. Any questions or concerns or discussion on that? Okay. Then we'll go
I
to,
have a question.
oh, excuse me.
Oh,
Commissioner
Bobby, did you want to go
DeKirk or
first?
Commissioner DeShaw? Go ahead.
The group discussed two approaches, say no, or do the route for 2 years. I'm just curious why there's not a third option of just saying yes, if that was discussed.
You know, I could comment, and Commissioner DeShaw, you certainly could do that. This is, I think the notes here were taken by a person, and they were trying to summarize the meeting, and I think there's a lot of discussion that was not put down here. It's not a transcript, but, yeah, and I think I have different interpretations of it too, but I think what is submitted is what's submitted. But there definitely was, I don't know if that explains, but that's only my point of view. Commissioner DeShaw, do you have any comment on that? About the minutes?
I think the group had kind of the same questions as everybody else does. There's a lot of unanswered questions,
Okay.
you know, and I'm hoping we can get some answers one of these days. I did send Representative Eklund a message to see if he has any updates on funding-wise or...
Yeah, okay. All right, so then let's go to the letter, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think there wasn't a strong opinion, yes or no, from this particular committee, but I think there was a great uneasiness about how many unanswered questions there are, about impacts, good and bad. Pretty much, if people felt like every question we asked Andrew at the meeting, he basically said he didn't know. And long-term support for how roads would be maintained, that there wasn't really any funding structure for that, I think, caused the group to kind of go down this path of saying, maybe not no, but maybe wait and see. I think that's where that came from. Does that answer your question, Commissioner? I hope. It was a long discussion, and it got summarized down to those 2 points, I think.
Okay, thank you. Then we received after a memo, an email from our Sheriff, Pat Eliason, and that was in your packet, and he had 4 concerns that he expressed, and in a summary statement, and I believe that everyone's had the opportunity to read that, so I'm not going to do that. He was a little more specific in his concerns in issues, and his last statement was, I think there are too many variables to agree that Cook County will become a partner in this venture and promote this as an activity. And I think was sort of a summary of what you just said, and we had just have a lot of questions. I myself, I serve on 2 committees, the Northern County Land Use Board and Intergovernmental Affairs, which is with the DNR and United States Forest Service, and we had been discussing this as well, and I know that my concerns expressed in those committees about is having more information on what kind of risks we're taking if we go down this road. So any questions or comments about, I guess Sheriff Eliason isn't here, but anyone want to comment on that? Commissioner Dukert?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the sheriff isn't here, because these concerns are valid, and they bring up a lot of questions, and my biggest question is that the sheriff signs off on permitting for events, so my concern is, why are we continuing to permit events in Cook County when there are concerns about the number of people, the environmental impacts, the damages to infrastructure? Where is the money coming from to maintain and repair our roads? You know, we have the Lutsen 99er, which is a wonderful race that started out with, I think, originally less than 100 racers, and now it's up to almost 2,000. And so I really need to have some information from the sheriff as to why we're continuing to approve events and increased business. I think that we need to have a very long discussion of the level of law enforcement that we need to continue to grow as a community. There are a lot of things that we have just continued to approve and support and move forward. It's unfortunate that it is only this event that we are questioning. I think overall, we need to question, from this point forward, every single thing. Everything. We approve building, maintaining, funding, transferring money through to build more trails, more routes, more paths. All of those things, when I sit on the Cook County invasive team and I sit on the plant invasives and the scenic byway, and I find out that the Gitchigami Trail has a huge invasion of invasive plant species along both ends, and that trail goes through public, private, state, local, and to get all of those groups together to try to mitigate what's going on, it's too late. We opened the door. We did it. And now we can't stop it. So, it's frightening. And what kind of resources are we going to need? What kind of people are we going to need? And to mitigate this, at this point, the mitigation is chemical invasion. What does that do to our community? What are those chemicals doing? I've seen the groups out spraying, and I see people stopping alongside the road, asking them to stop. When you watch them spraying, they're wearing face masks. This is huge. It's not just the border-to-border route. It is every single thing that we do. And so I don't have a problem with saying no, but if we're going to say no, we say no to everything.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll just comment that there, at the bottom of the page from the minutes of the Public Safety and Transportation Committee, it states the committee discussed special events and related permitting process. Rena has started discussing levels of service for special events with Visit Cook County. As the number and size of events continues to increase, the entities affected, sheriff, ambulance, and so forth, parenthetically, are being strained to their limits. A collaborative discussion among involved entities may be needed to discuss service options. So, yes, thank you for your comments, and I think the Public Safety and Transportation Committee is going to take a look at this, and it's going to be, I'm sure, something we'll discuss as well, not just with the, maybe this just was a point where we started needing to focus more on that because of the magnitude.
I'd like to believe that, but
Well, it's in the minutes, and I think your points are well taken. Yes.
I guess my comment on this event, which could start in April and go through November, would be a little bit different than a bike race, than a this, than a that. This is a huge event, so the perspective on this would be much different than a one-time event. That's just my observation of this.
they're estimating 10 vehicles a week. So over a 10-week period, that's 100 vehicles, maximum 200, and we have events that bring in thousands at one time.
Okay, Commissioner DeShawn?
Am I missing something here? Because everybody talks about events. I have not seen an event for this posted anywhere.
Right? There isn't an event posted.
You know, everybody keeps talking about events and this and that, and you don't need a permit to drive on this. People are already driving on it. The roads that are going to be used, they're all logging roads. I've hauled wood off of most of those roads through, summer and winter, and, I don't see the Minnesota Four-Wheel Drive Association trying to put in a permit at this moment for 3,000 Jeeps.
Yeah, I think the question that came up in public safety is if there were jamborees or something like that were nationally advertised, where, and I'm not saying that we do something, but the question is, should that be a permanent event? And we're not saying that, I think it's a discussion point from my understanding that let's take a look at our event permitting process, and so I think that's a discussion, and this could be part of that, especially if it was something where it was an organized event and you had to close your roads for crossings and so forth. So what kicks that in? My understanding, some of the concerns I've heard is that if something's nationally advertised, what amount of traffic can we expect? Can it be 1,000, 3,000 in the summer, and then, but as far as having, let's say, a jamboree, I think they have them around the country, does that constitute an event? And
Yes,
so-
because it would block off roads.
Yeah.
So this isn't an event, this is just someone using our roads.
Right.
So what's the concern? I mean, are we going to shut the roads to everything? Are we going to stop tourism? I mean, I don't understand why this is still a discussion.
I
Because
think
it's
if,
not an event.
no, I guess if it was, well, I'm not going to
Well, I guess
argue that point, but I think if someone is going to have something that constitutes shutting down road traffic, like if there's 500 that are going to come at one time and have an event, that would be advertised like anything else, then what do we do about that?
Yeah.
We haven't really discussed that.
I understand that, but the border-to-border is not an event.
Right, no, but
So-
it could be leading into events.
But we're treating it like an event. That's
I'm not.
kind of what you're saying. We're treating it like an event where we say yes or no to it, and it's not an event.
Well, I think we can treat it like a plan and say yes or no to it as well, because that's what it is a plan. But it seems like where the and maybe I missed something from before, but it seems like we're the event, I mean, you just said like we need to question everything.
Yeah.
And I would say typically do have questions about most things, and typically we have answers, and then that's how we can make our decisions, but right now, there aren't a whole lot of answers.
So my questioning in everything is we have quite often the bike group come in and say, will the county be the agency for the funding? We're going to put in a new route. And we say yes, without question.
Well, and those plans, they go through, oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
Well, I've got a response to that. I think it's been a request by the DNR for the county board to weigh in on this, and that's why we're discussing it.
It's also a request of the county board when we accept funding for bike trails.
Yep, and I think the board
And we
took
don't
action.
question it, we just say yes.
But we could say no.
But we don't.
I think we say yes because they come with a good degree of plans so that we question them, and then we can either say yes or no. But they don't come just off the street to say, oh, we're going to do this or that. They come with a definite plan. Now, that's not to say because fat bikes are more involved in winter sports. We didn't have that 2 years ago. Now we have fat bikes. Who knows what the next mode of transportation will be. So I think, when they come before us, they have a plan. I didn't feel when I attended the Skype that the DNR has a real specific plan.
They do have a specific plan, they have a specific route, they have funding set, they're moving forward on legislation, there's $200,000 set aside for maintenance at this point. So, they did come to us with the plan. Why are you shaking your head, Norina? Please share.
They had 200,000 set aside, but he said there was no ongoing funding. They didn't know, and Kristen clarified that before our meeting about, I think it was four-wheel drive funding or wheelage tax or something. I'm not real specific on that, but wondering if it could be used for that, and the answer came back no. So I think maybe one of the things that people were most concerned about is that there's no long-term funding strategy for this. It's just that, we'll go back to the legislature and see if they'll, it'll be up to them to do this over and over again. And so that's where some of the discomfort came from. So there's some initial funding, but that certainly doesn't cover the many miles of trail that they're talking about across the whole state. And there was no ongoing funding secured at this point. So that's why I'm shaking my head no. Sorry.
So in this, for Cook County, it's 18 miles of county road. So that's what we need to be concerned about funding to cover the 18 miles of county road. Minnesota Four-Wheel Drive Association provides $250,000 annually for this route for DNR law enforcement.
So that covers or that could potentially cover that's presumably going to cover our 18 miles, and what about the rest of it?
Well, here's kind of where I'm struggling is, as Ginny said, these other groups come with plans, but they don't come with future plans. They don't come and tell us how they're going to provide funding in the future. They don't come and tell us how they're going to maintain these routes. They don't come and provide us funding for law enforcement or anything else. They don't cover any of that. And so it's this constant question of me saying, we have to question everything equally. So maybe we come up with a list of questions for each thing that comes forward.
That's a good idea.
We don't ask this for other things. We don't say, how are you going to continue to maintain this? How are you going to pay for law enforcement? How are you going to cover search and rescue when someone crashes their bike into a tree? There's no cell service out there. What's going to happen? None of this partner question has happened up to this point, and I'm really sorry that I feel like this thing is being questioned differently.
I think there's been search and rescue questions in the past, and maybe it was more at the city council level when I was involved, but I am aware of those issues with different projects. I think in my mind, the biggest difference is the scale. When you're talking you know, you can, the level of funding required to maintain a road versus maintain a single-track trail is, I mean, the cost of a single-track trail is nothing to sneeze at, but the difference is
1 million for 3 miles.
is very large.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the bigger difference is, and the bigger concern, quite frankly, because there's a road has a larger impact than a trail.
So for me, looking at the spread of invasive species, when I look at a hiking route or a bike route, people often go off of those routes and they carry those invasive species on their boots and they go out into different areas, and it's very hard to mitigate that, where when you are driving on a road, you are on a surface that is already
Yeah.
protected.
Well, and that's invasive species is certainly one of the factors we should consider, but I think there's some other ones as well, right?
Absolutely.
And so when I'm talking about impacts, I mean, you're more closely involved with the invasive species than I am, so that's not the front of my mind. My perspective is coming more from just the costs of our infrastructure, you know.
Yeah.
And there's unanswered questions there, you know, as far as
Right.
the funding.
So there's a large chunk of the Gunflint Trail in this route. And I know, I believe it was 2012, MnDOT did a traffic survey on the Gunflint Trail. And for the area of this route, the average vehicle is over 1,800 vehicles per day. So if you take that into 365 days, you're talking about 500,000 vehicles a year drive on this section of the route that we're responsible for. So how is 200 more vehicles going to have a huge adverse impact on that?
I don't know that we can use those numbers. Do you think those are,
Well, that's my question. You know, when we're talking about what's the impact to our infrastructure, well, we already have impacts to the infrastructure because of tourism. And the impact for my district, for my section of the route, is the traffic counts. And and those traffic counts were done years ago, and we already know, based on Bob coming forward with vacation rentals, that the number of people coming into Cook County is growing, and the number of visitors is growing, and so those traffic counts are probably higher at this point.
yeah. I have a hard, and no offense to any of our staff, or I have a hard time with some of the traffic counts that just with the County Road 45 project, there's a lot of inconsistencies there, so I don't know that, it's hard for me to base a discussion on the traffic counts.
Well, it's an average, and this one was done by MnDOT,
Yeah,
so it's not our staff we're picking on.
yeah,
If I could just interrupt, and, you know, again, I think our purpose is to give some kind of response back to the DNR, whether we're going to participate in the route or not participate, or are we going to have some qualifications? So all of these things are very valid in discussions in general, but I'd like to keep us on focus to B2B.
This is a focus of B2B. I can't make a decision for the DNR unless I have these discussions about the route and its impact. It's important.
Okay, so do you have any more to offer on this?
That's
I'm
what
trying
we're
to work
talking
through the
about. We're talking
material.
about the impact to our roads and our infrastructure.
those are some of the questions and concerns that I have and I've heard from constituents, is largely about impacts and so what I was trying to flesh out is kind of Heidi's thoughts on, the difference between roads and, say, a trail. And whereas
okay.
there still are impacts with trails, and we should maybe look a little harder at those impacts in the future. And so that's what I was trying to
Okay.
see where she was coming
Yeah,
from.
no, and I agree. I'm trying to bring us back to the border-to-border route, but you still want to discuss further.
I was specifically talking about the impact of vehicles on the road for the
Okay,
border-to-border route.
okay.
Jimmy had her hand up.
Yes, and I would say that somebody needs to do an environmental impact before we go with anything. because that's the important thing about what's going to happen, invasive species, all of this stuff. What kind of impact is it going to have on this trail? It's not even a road, it's just a trail, right? I've not been on it, but Bobby, you have, or Heidi?
It's not a trail, it's a road.
It's a road.
It's a road. You're driving on the road.
On a road.
Yes, on roads that are already there. It is not a trail. It is public roads.
And the degree of the road condition right now would be
Logging trucks drive it.
on this little road in the
Yes.
county? This 18 miles?
Well, the county roads are 18 miles of the full route, which
Yes.
includes the Gunflint Trail.
Right.
We've driven the Gunflint Trail.
Yes,
So it is roads.
okay.
Yeah, and the 18 miles is, I think, important because of the actual road, but there are other impacts besides just the road, right? Or
Right.
like water quality. Do we have concerns about if Forest Service roads are not maintained to the same standards that we would like as a county, which my understanding is there's been challenges with Forest Service funding, maintaining the current roads.
But those aren't our roads. The Forest Service has its own decision to make about the route
Yes,
and the roads. Our decision is the impact on our roads.
well, the impact of our county.
Yes, we also have to take that into
And
consideration.
that's where I'm going, is that this is, even if it's not county land, it's within the county's jurisdiction, and we need to consider the impacts
Absolutely.
of the county as a whole.
So how does driving on a road impact our water quality?
Or minimum maintenance roads, some of these, right? The Forest Service ones, or no? How do those, that's one of the questions we had, and that's one of the things I was curious about from Soil and Water, and maybe that's not a good process to go through, and we need to,
I think that's a question for Forest Service and DNR since it's their roads.
okay, I don't know. I guess that's a question I have, is who can we ask about impacts of water quality throughout the county on minimum maintenance roads or some of these Forest Service roads? The county, the county road we're talking about, is that Shoe Lake Road?
That's
That
not
is
a
Forest
county.
Service.
Where was the,
Arrowhead Trail, Gunflint Trail.
Where was that,
There's a couple intersections.
SGSD hoped for?
Shoe Lake Road.
Okay. And so that's a Forest Service road
That's
that
a Forest-
SGSD wanted to
yes.
potentially do.
That's why they wanted to do a service district, because it's not a county-maintained road.
Right. So that's another, of course, conversation, right?
Yeah, the DNR is looking at that. But I think the question is with the Forest Service and how their roads are maintained and what impacts could be from that. You know, maybe we have another committee of the whole and have the Forest Service talk us through that. And I believe that Mike said they were doing an environmental impact, but they wouldn't do it until it's approved because of the resources.
I could comment on that. I've had discussions a couple of times with the Forest Service and the DNR on these committees I serve, and Commissioner DeShaw, you were at the meeting with the Forest Service on this last discussion. There is no requirement for the Forest Service to necessarily do, it's called a worksheet, because it's on current roads. So my understanding is that they're not necessarily going to do one because this is on current usage.
So do they
If
have
it is
no,
used at some point, or we could, and citizens can apply or make a petition to have some environmental review done, but to my knowledge, it's not planned as part of this process because it's using current roads. And part of our discussion could be that, you know, and I don't want to get there yet, we're not there yet, and the discussion that's going forward is how do we deal with that? I know when we have wet years, I've been on a lot of these roads, we get a lot of water standing in those roads and coming over the ditches, and I've spent 27 years riding around on these roads on that east end. So, I think that's something that we could get into, but as I understand it now, there's no plan to do an environmental review, or if at very minimum, a worksheet, but it would be on current conditions of these roads and impact, not when you change this. So that's, Commissioner DeShaw, is that your understanding?
I think what I gathered at that meeting was that the Forest Service has not been approached yet to
Yeah.
use these roads, so.
Yeah. And I think that's going to come from, they're waiting for the county to weigh in or not. And I think that's the topic here is, how do we go forward? Commissioner Mills, did you have your hand up?
I did not, no.
Okay, thank you. Oh, excuse me, Heidi.
So that's kind of a big statement from the Forest Service that they're not doing an environmental impact because it's a road that we already use. That kind of says what I was saying. But just a reminder that when we talk to the DNR and in the past discussions, they have said that if the road is wet, we will change it. So if the conditions change, if the season changes, the DNR will pull the route for Cook County, or they will change the route if the conditions warrant that it shouldn't be driven at any time during the season. So
I haven't seen
it-
anything in writing on that. I guess that's my only concern.
we haven't asked for it in writing, but during all of our conversations with us, they were very, very clear about that it is amiable. Mary Strucka told us that over and over again, and when Andrew Brown came in, I asked him, I said, these are the things that Mary promised to Cook County, these are concerns that we have, that when it gets wet, we don't want people driving on these roads, even though they're roads and they can be driven when it's wet. It's absolutely true that they are willing to pull down the Cook County. They'll put a notice on the website that says, at this time, the border-to-border route is not passable for Cook County. I mean, all of these things have been said.
I think that has to be under the authority of the United States Forest Service.
It's a DNR route. The advertising will be on the DNR website.
Okay, it's a matter of authority, and I'm not sure, but that's not my understanding. Yes?
I just hope that they have enough people to monitor it, It's a lot of monitoring. If you're going to find a road that's wet, or you say, well, we've had, 3 hours of rain, maybe it compromises the roads. I don't know who's going to do all that. But I like our highway engineer, Kristen Foster's comment, and I like to think about we can work together, as a team on this, requesting the DNR and the Forest Service to move forward with the project's environmental review phase before the board takes action.
So again, I think we need to have a discussion with them and find out what the process is, what order we do it in, because I think they're waiting for us.
Yeah, there is a lot of, the process seems very cloudy to me, and I think that's causing some conflict. So it'd be good to clarify the process and,
Well then, excuse me, are you finished?
I'm never finished, but for now, I'll be at that.
Well,
But for now,
my plan was to go through the material, so if it's all right, we'll move on to Kristen Foster's memo, starting with the page, it's page 12 in that section. And she proposes any combination of these, opposing or not supporting the route, until we observe the impacts of increased B2B traffic across other Minnesota counties. In other words, consider it after it's been tried elsewhere, so they work out some of the issues. Then requesting DNR, United States Forest Service, to move forward with the project's environmental review phase before the county board takes action on the route. And I bring that up because I think that's what you were referring to. And of course, a combination. So let's go into that discussion. Do you see any other options other than these threes or a combination of the above in that memo? And page 12 from letter to the, memo to the commissioners from
After
Kristen.
the resolution.
It's page 12.
I don't have pages, I'm on an electronic device, I'm sorry, Myron.
So it's a memo, January 15th, 2020, RE proposed border-to-border turning route, starts Dear Commissioners, and she sent a copy to Andrew Brown and Michael Coteau. So that's, did you find it?
Opposing or not supporting the route, opposing or not supporting the route until we observe the impacts. Requesting DNR US Forest Service to move forward, environmental review, or combination of above. She also has a resolution in there to
Yes, I'll get
support.
to that.
And we also had a recommendation to try it for 2 years, and that's not in the list. To give it 2 years to see what the impact is, and then say whether or not we continue.
That's certainly an option. It doesn't look like that's what
not in-
Kristen's
Yeah.
recommending as an option.
Right. And I think there was some confusion in our meeting on that, whether that was, are we going to end up, I think the impact on public safety is something that we'd have to, if we tried it for a while, we would have to more than likely increase our public safety staffing because the assignment of overtime just is at a maxed out level. So that's why Pat Elias and their sheriff had indicated in his memo his concerns about the public safety, even if trying it. So he had recommended that we not go forward and opt as a 2-year trial because of the implications for public safety. So if you look back at his memo, it's referred to in his last closing statements. So I think that's why it's not on this page, and I don't think I could support that at all because of the
Okay.
risk.
So the number 2, there's no numbers on there, opposing or not supporting until we observe the impacts. You can just remove that because how it impacts other communities is not how it's going to impact us. It's very different in other communities. And I can tell you the other counties on the route, once the route has gone forward, they're not going to want to put us on the map with the rest of them and impact their funding sources. So I'd just say that you take that second one right off of there. You can't step in after it's already done. So it's either oppose
Well,
or
we-
approve.
We could request it.
You don't think they would like to expand the route once it's in place?
No, they're going to select the route and do their research and do their environmental impacts and all of that. So to come in, if it's successful elsewhere, again, we don't know if it's successful elsewhere, if that means it's successful here. But if we come in after the fact and say, oh, this has been successful elsewhere, now we want to be on the team, then that's cost for them to do more research and add it in. And we've already said no to them. So I would
We
just.
should do the research now.
Well, then that means saying yes.
That's the whole point.
If I could, I think it wasn't just a matter of being successful. I think it was getting some answers to questions about economic impact, about how much traffic the route would actually have on it. It wasn't so much about whether it's successful or not, or, it was more like a lot of the basic questions that have been asked. Is there going to be sustainable funding? Is there going to be some other things that the DNR isn't really able to answer right now? Kind of takes a wait and see to say, yeah, okay, they've answered those questions and those concerns, so then we'd
To
be
me,
more.
those are standards of success. Success to me is having solid funding and doing all of that stuff.
So,
And again, other communities are not tourism-based to the level that we are. So the impacts to them are very different than the impacts to us.
Getting back to Sheriff Elias's statement, these are some of the concerns which I have, and I'm sure there are others who will have voiced additional concerns. I think there are too many variables to agree that Cook County will become a partner in this venture and promote this as an activity. So I think if we as a board, try this on a trial basis, or if we support it, then we have to commit, I think, to funding, especially public safety, that's sort of maxed out for very good reasons, because of tourism especially. And in talking to the sheriff, he said, you know, on these events times, he can't let people off, and they have to work overtime. And so I think if we add additional responsibilities based upon his recommendation, that we would have to be prepared in our budget to spend more money on public safety. And then I would just like to comment on that further, and this is in response to just trying it. We're faced with the Thigh-Blotnick appraisal issue. And part of that money that we get for that is used for public safety and definitely for those areas that are more remote. And even though it's not line item for a specific area, that's the intent of that. And we have 2 years in which hopefully we'll work that out. I'm only speaking of the funding aspect now, that looking at risk management, that we need to plan for the future. And if we go forward with this project, my main concern, and I said it in the minutes of that meeting, would be what are the financial implications for us? And with the Thigh-Blotnick money being questioned, then we're maybe even looking at how much more do we have to assess locally for public safety and other issues in which that was intended for. And if we try something, we're pretty much saying we're going to commit to public safety to those areas and for that increased traffic. So I think that's part of the discussion as well, as the financial implications of, and I'm very concerned about, you know, we don't know if we're going to maintain the past level of funding from Thigh-Blotnick until we get that process done, and we have 2 years to do it. Commissioner Dukert.
Why would we add law enforcement when we have absolutely no idea how many people are coming?
That question went to our sheriff, and he responded.
He responded that he thinks he would have to add public safety. That's why I say we do a trial, and we say we can only handle 100 additional cars. I have no idea how you determine whether those cars are for general tourism or the border-to-border route. And then if we exceed 100 cars, then we call the DNR and we say, take us off the map because we can't handle it. I would be opposed to adding any more public safety staff just because of this route.
I think that would be up to the sheriff and his requests, and I certainly would pay attention to it because public safety is very...
I agree, 100%. Public safety is huge. But if there is an increase in traffic, then we say no, done, cancel, get out.
I don't know if that's an option.
It is.
Oh, I think we've got to talk to the DNR about that.
Well, I'm getting confirmation from the Minnesota Four-Wheel Drive Association that's watching our discussion. Any county can remove itself from the route at any time.
We have to talk to the DNR about that. And that's fine, it's important, but I'm looking at process, and this issue is with the DNR. They've asked the county to weigh in on this, and our response is to the DNR, not to the Four-Wheel Drive Association.
Four-Wheel Drive Association is working with the DNR on this project.
Okay, any other comments on that?
I just think we need data. I can't emphasize that enough. Not moving forward with the trial, nothing.
So
Get
what,
the data first.
what data do we need?
Well, as it stated, the DNR, the Forest Service, and us need to have some type of environmental review. We need to work together on that first. No trial as far as I'm concerned. You're opening the gates. And Heidi, you like data, right?
I do like data.
Okay.
But
Let's get it.
I need to know what data.
Well, I just stated
Just
it.
an environmental review, that's it?
One of them. That's part of it.
What else?
I think they need to come forward with more specifics on what they're going to do with the forest roads. What are they going to do with money? We don't know. 200,000, where's that going to go with 11 counties? Or maybe 10 now, I think one bowed out.
8.
There's just too many variables.
Anything else?
I hear a lot of ifs. If we need more law enforcement service, if people come, we don't know that. You know, they might establish the route, but there might be nobody that uses it.
Right.
You know, and you say you need, the sheriff says we'll need more traffic control. These are all licensed vehicles. There's stop signs on roads. There's speed limits on roads. They have to obey them. You
Well,
know.
Ginny had a good point. She said, stop them at the gate, so let's stop everybody. Stop
Okay.
everybody.
I'd like to get back to maybe the next step, and this is not a decision, but we definitely are not going to be agreeing on this at all, and nor is it the intent of this meeting to do that. In your packet, I don't know, I don't think this is on a page number, but it came from the Highway Department, and this is with my signature on it as a possibility. If we need more information, and we just got so many questions, rather than scheduling this as a item on an upcoming county board meeting, we do have the option to request more information. And so if you find that, could you try to find that for all of us to look at? No? Okay. It's a subject, it was written by the Highway Department, Kristen Foster, but it's got my signature on it. And I'll just read it. Dear Mr. Brown, this is to Andrew Brown. There we go, thank you. Thank you for your November 27th presentation to Cook County's Public Safety and Transportation Committee. While we respect DNR's interest in Cook County forming an opinion of the DNR's proposal sooner rather than later, county decision makers generally agree that we do not have enough information to act at this point in time. Before DNR ultimately approaches the County Board of Commissioners to request designating this route across segments of county highways, please consider the following. And then there's two bullets there, and it could be something else as well. One of them is the County Board requests DNR respects the citizens' request to hold a public hearing or another DNR-led public information meeting in Grand Marais, considering the number of months that have passed since DNR's initial information meetings. Or it could be a few important outstanding questions and include analyzing the anticipated environmental impacts of this route, estimating traffic and tourism impacts as they relate to emergency services, and road maintenance consideration, and inhibiting the risk of spreading invasive species. Then please contact interim administrator, Attorney Hicken, Sheriff Foster, to continue to keep us apprised of the DNR's actions. So this could be a memo that could come from us, from myself as county board chair, with one of those two options or both of them that are listed there, and then see what their response is. And we also could maybe include the United States Forest Service as well.
Well, bullet point 3, Ginny had a very important question, and that was the funding.
Right, okay, funding.
And there's a big difference between a public meeting and a public hearing.
Yeah, I think this would be a public meeting by the DNR. Yeah.
Okay, but it says hearing in here, so we should change that.
Public information meeting.
Before that, it says hearing.
Oh, excuse me.
Or.
Thank you.
It's either or.
But there's a big difference.
We might want to have it as a meeting instead of
Right.
just a hearing.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a good point. Thank you. So with this, I guess, then we got into resolutions, and quite frankly, as I'm reading the group, I just don't think we're ready to go there. nor should we, maybe. Those are the options that we consider if it comes to, it will come to the board at some time. My understanding, it's a DNR wants us to do this, but I think we have legitimate concerns to request more information from the DNR again to it. So I guess if anyone's opposed to sort of, we could bring this to the leadership team on Monday and rework this a little bit with the county attorney and send it on to see what the reaction is so we can move forward. Anyone really opposed to that? I know it's not a decision. Commissioner Duker?
I would like the DNR to meet with the county board before it meets with the public, because these are questions that we have.
So it'd be very similar to the meeting we had with them by Skype.
Well, the meeting with Skype was for the Public Safety Committee. I
Okay.
want a meeting specifically with us. I want the sheriff there. I want Kristen there.
And that
And
would-
if we have to do it in April so that the weather doesn't affect whether or not people can make it, Kristen wasn't able to get here because she was stuck in weather-related traffic. You know, the public elects us to make decisions,
Sure.
and yes, they should have a meeting and they should get their questions answered, but
Okay.
we, as the deciding body, have a lot of questions
Okay.
that we want answers to.
But it would still be a public information meeting. It wouldn't be a county board meeting.
We can do it at a county board meeting, or we can do it at a committee of the whole, or we can do it as an information meeting, but I don't want it to be
Right.
an open
Okay.
forum. I want it to be us getting our concerns addressed. And I think that we need to list those very clearly so that they can come in here, and instead of saying, I don't have answers to that, we have solid answers.
Okay? Anyone else? So I think if there's no dissension, we'll,
Well, I guess.
Go ahead.
So to your point, what you're suggesting is we first as a board meet with Sheriff, Engineer Foster.
And the DNR,
And the
Andrew
DNR,
Brown,
and the
and
Forest
maybe
Service.
Forest Service needs to be here to answer those
I
questions.
think that'd be
it'll still
awesome.
be a public meeting.
The
Yep,
public is
we're all here,
welcome,
yep.
but it's not information for the
That's-
public.
I mean,
It's not directed for
At the
question and
public, yeah.
answer for the public. And so I guess my question would be then, do you think we should have that as well?
We can have that. Well, first, maybe the information that comes to us, we decide, hey, this isn't going to work for us. Then there's no need to have a public information because it's canceled. I think it's premature to work with the public when we are still very undecided. We all have concerns. I mean, you have concerns?
Yeah,
okay, so I think
that seems like a good process.
we could either next Monday or Monday thereafter, draft a resolution, and then we could send it out to all of you, and then with sort of give some kind of approval, or could we do it before? I'm just thinking process, have it available so that it's on the board agenda, that we agree on the resolution, the letter. What, Rena, what do you think?
So a letter to,
It'd be like this with some, but it would be just with the board at a public meeting.
okay, so what I just heard was more about having all those players come and have a discussion with the board before we did a resolution. Is that accurate? So the next opportunity we would have to do that would probably be the first meeting in February. I could check with those parties and see
Okay.
if we could put them on the agenda to come in, and we could maybe, commissioners could send me their concerns, and we could put that into a list that we could circulate. Is that, I'm seeing a
Yeah.
head nodding over there, that would be a way that you would get your questions at least on the table collectively.
Yeah.
And if there are still questions unanswered, that would be something then you would all note and discuss what the impacts of that are.
Yep,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay,
Okay?
we can do that. If you all could send me your
Okay.
concerns, and I would add to that the list of concerns from the Public Safety Transportation.
Absolutely.
and I'll see what's the soonest time we could get all those players in.
And probably this packet should go to them so they can see the sheriff and highway engineer's
Yep.
concerns and
Yep,
questions.
I would add those to the list as well.
Okay.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
do that.
Very good. Well, then, I think as board chair, we'll move on, and I think let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll go to the county assessor, Robert Thompson, for his presentation.
They're not.
On voting, how do we vote by mail
What's that?
designate?
Which one has the copy? This one?
Yep.
So you're going to get two
No,
ballots
they're-
in the mail.
Yes.
There,
Vote one,
there is a designated
or the other one. Outside of the envelope, there's actually a list of 4. We have 4 major parties. Well, only 2 of them that shows to be in this, are Democrat and Republican. You're going to check one, and I really have to emphasize, you can't mess that up. Because the ballots are checked.
I mean,
'Cause
we might want to, I think
They
that the
have to
way
see
to address that might be to address our event permit process, which I think we've been talking about before, right?
You made a mistake on putting the ballot in or the check mark, so they have to reject it if they don't. But if they match, the ballot gets counted.
You know, if you take 2 ambulances.
I think so. I mean, I see a lot of letters in the Minneapolis paper.
They can still go ahead and vote in that.
What's the mitigation
Oh,
strategy?
sure.
Somebody
No, they
who
want-
lives in
Yeah.
these towns.
Why didn't the legislature think of
You
that?
know what I'm saying?
Well, no, not only did they not
Or
think of
somebody,
it, but
or
the county auditors
or
association
wait, ambulances, where there's
and the Secretary of State, they proposed legislative changes. They put them all on one ballot, just like the regular primary, in the columns, and they rejected it. The legislature rejected it. And other changes too, to make it, to make it simpler. And, well, giving the information to the parties, I think, was
You know, maybe
two
it's the
that they
cost of the
rejected.
permits. Or
And
maybe they have
that's
to
the part that I'm,
their own services.
I haven't had time to look it up or ask anybody, but I'm curious as to why the legislature gives so much.
There's,
I mean, I can see setting up some kind of a
Is there something in
format
the state
based on the
constitution?
number of
Is there
expected
something in,
attendees or your
since
cap
it's a
for
federal
attendees.
election, something in federal election?
well, that's
Registration.
kind of the
That
conversation.
makes them defer to that?
You know, what's a
Or what is it?
sustainable?
So when are we gonna get our
You
ballots?
can't, if it keeps going infinite,
Same,
you know, and what's the
which is
expectation of event organizers?
they come out between the third and the second week before.
Being up here,
So we'll start
being part of a planning
working on it,
process. So, it's all interesting.
starting February. We'll have them all in the mail by the end of that week, you know,
Okay. 'cause
first
I'll
of the
need
next
to
week.
Get mine back in, because I won't be here for March.
Yeah.
During our meeting.
So-
Testing what the previous during the meetings. Especially when drive associations are saying, no, this isn't true.
I did not catch that.
That's good.
Pardon?
That's good.
Yeah, good discussion.
I'm hoping we can get something figured out with my neck here before I have those surgeries.
Amputation.
Ask you what you're coloring?
Christmas present for my husband. Trying to figure
How do
out
you-
ways to not interrupt.
You're doing pretty well.
I
Thank
would
you.
say that your concerns mirror what we've been talking about, which is about events. We don't have any event permit in here to speak of, other than, there's going to be a road crossing. No, I started a conversation. And it was at a party at my house.
They got a lot of
I think we
skiing
went
and
to this one.
Okay.
Right.
have a PowerPoint.
Well, I think we have to just say we have our responsibility. Absolutely. And not only the public that are here for events, but from public, those resources are taken away from it during the event. And we don't know how to handle it. So how do we get to that? And so I
Maybe this is the
have
thing that's just-
started that conversation. And
Maybe
it's
those
just
other batteries
lifting
will
the
work.
corner of it up a little bit.
Do you all understand I have the exact?
There we go. Thank you.
I do. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just, when I was saying what I said, I was just trying to clarify what had been discussed in the meeting.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because that little, I didn't see a little light there.
I'm here with you, you're right on with this impact of how do we deal with tourism, because I've said to some of these people that you've got to step up and understand that we're absorbing a lot of this. We're not
Border to
getting the
border is
resources.
different than tourism. Is this route, you can say done, done. We can't say done to tourism. This route we can.
Yes, it is.
But I think at some point in time, we have to start dialogue with just what impact does that have on our services?
Right. And that's the way I've been trying to frame the conversation as a service provider. This way.
Because anytime I talk about public
No, but I'm trying to talk about it from the point of view of, if we're providing a service, we want to make sure that we provide it adequately. Right. And that's, if somebody wants to give me a bump.
I would like a little more than
I'll worry about
adequate.
it. Yes, I'm all about excellent customer service. Right. If taking these officers out of here means that something else is.
Here's my question, who is responsible for 92% of land that we don't own? Is the sheriff responsible, or is the Forest Service responsible?
Well, there's also.
DNR patrols, border
It's true,
patrols.
but we also have
It's part of
search and rescue.
Which is
Which is
volunteer,
it's
under the
under
sheriff's
sheriff's.
department. But this is why I wanted the sheriff here, because we in general don't know how all of those connect. I know where they're all coming in, what trails.
I think mine's, keep what you're going to say back there, you had concerns as well about fire,
Exact same.
Okay, let's try to get going, folks.
We're not breaking meeting laws.
Civil at all.
Hey, Brown.
Apologize. I barked at you. It didn't. I felt it.
All right, so I'm setting up a meeting.
I took, yeah, because I heard my name mentioned, or I saw it in that memo. I took some notes if you, I can share them with you if you want.
Waiting for a response from Keith.
Nelson? Mr. Happy?
I'll get on with it.
I'm gonna call him Mr. Happy.
Okay,
Wow, okay, Dave?
we'll call a meeting to order again. Committee of the
I'll
whole.
ask you something, but we're not going to.
We've been on tape the whole time.
I know.
Go right ahead.
Was Ginny? Oh, Ginny's here.
And our next item is tax classification discussion. Welcome, Robert, our county assessor, and we're ready for you, I guess. Thanks for sitting through.
So, the main reason why I'm here, I guess, is to give you guys some information. Just a little bit of a history. In 2016, 17, and 18, Cook County added about 1% to the tax capacity, which is essentially what is the pool that you're gaining tax dollars from when you set the levy rate. In 2019, the levy increase was over 10%, and that was specifically due to the majority of it, a classification change on a number of properties. Todd had changed most of the vacation rentals, pretty much all of the vacation rentals, from seasonal recreational cabins to residential non-homesteads.
So you said the levy increased 10%, but it was the tax capacity that
Right,
increased. Okay.
you're correct. It is the tax capacity, which, is roughly double the levy. So, a 10% increase in the tax capacity could equate to a little under 5%, or a little over 5% of the levy. So, thank you for the correction, but yes, you are right. So the 1% tax increase in capacity over the previous 3 years, it was 10 times that amount last year in 2019. Now, given the memo from the Department of Revenue, it essentially says these are either commercial or seasonal recreational, which they've left it up to the assessors, the county assessors, to make the decision of what's the primary use. Given, the 500-plus responses I got to my questionnaire, which is a really good turnout, we sent out 650, I think we got about 500 back. I would say the majority of them are going to go back to the seasonal recreational class. So essentially what that means is some of that tax capacity that we gained in 2019 will disappear. That means even if the levy was set at 0, you would have an increase in taxation. So it's a tough thing to face. Now, there is a group of individuals, different organizations, business owners, everyone involved who's essentially concerned about this memo issued by the Department of Revenue. The fear is essentially going to commercial. These taxpayers' bills would triple, and, but looking at the numbers, not very many of them would go to commercial under the 183-day threshold that I've come up with. Now, 2 years from now, that could be totally different. There could be more directive issued from the Department of Revenue. They could say advertisement is a use. Someone could take this to tax court, and the tax court judges have kind of already ruled that advertisement is a primary use, and that, these could all go commercial, say it 2-3 years down the road if another tax court case goes that route. So they have this working group of business owners and individuals visit Cook County, the Cook County Chamber, have had discussions. I was involved in a meeting on the 6th of January to talk about this very issue, and essentially it's, just a bit of an overview. I have a PowerPoint here that's going to give you a little bit of an overview of the history, the potential future, and what they're looking at is trying to find a middle ground. So rather than saying this is either seasonal recreational cabin or commercial and determining that through 650 questionnaires, we would just say these are defined as this, and there would be no question of how they're being used. They'd be defined in that mixed use category, and essentially where does the middle ground fall? That's not something that I don't have a say in. Obviously, you guys can either support or not support something through resolution, that a bill that might come forward in the future. But I'm basically going to just give you a little bit of rundown of what that looks like. So the first slide here talks that they were typically taxed as a 4C12, which is seasonal recreational, non-commercial. They have reduced rates versus like where we're at now, the residential non-homestead. It's actually one of the lowest rates that like a house or a cabin could be classified as. They don't contribute to any of the voter-approved referenda like the schools and the hospitals, those things. And they do pay into the seasonal recreational state general fund. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
A question this time. Do you know when this 4C12 came into existence?
I want to say it was the early 2000s. The Cabin Owners Association, which is over 300,000 members strong at that point in time, lobbied for a classification that would be more predictable, more level and sustainable. It wouldn't have the volatility for the voter-approved referenda. They typically aren't going to have kids in the school, so they don't pay into that stuff. They don't have a voting voice in those referenda. So that was kind of a goal of the Cabin Owners Association back in the early 2000s to get something defined for them. Also, I think to partly make it more affordable to afford a second home and second cabin. There's so many investors buying up property in Minnesota and throughout the country that they wanted to make it more affordable. So that's how they have historically been classified in Cook County. Most of the other counties in the state, it's the same way, or it has been the same way. Very few counties that I know of, in fact, I only know of 2 counties that have classified these as commercial properties in the past. McLeod County, which had the tax court case in 2014, also Chisago County, but both those counties don't have nearly the numbers or the percentages that Cook County has, as well as a lot of northern Minnesota counties. So the memo that came out May 21st of 2019 basically says to identify a primary use and classify it that way. If it's used majority of the year as a cabin, then it's one of the lowest rates, the seasonal recreational. And if it's primarily used as a rental, that's 3A commercial. It is the absolute highest rate in the system. So essentially, what I see happening is this year, people are looking at this and saying, okay, well, I only want to rent 182 days, and I'm going to take it out of the rental market during, I'm only going to try and promote my rental activity during the highest income levels, the highest rates. So, I mean, that's something that, it's not for sure, but it seems like that might be the course that people take.
Could you wait until they're done talking? I'm having a hard time hearing you. Okay, thank you.
So essentially, that's, and that's what some of the business owners obviously expressed at the board meeting in December. I think it was on the 17th, where, these business owners and organizations in the county came in and expressed concerns about slowing shoulder seasons and those types of things. So, cleaners losing jobs and stuff like that. So there are some negative impacts, specific to my office. We have to send out, the resources that it takes to identify primary use, sending out 600 and some questionnaires, and then getting the responses. I mean, these are things I've been dealing with essentially since the beginning of December when the questionnaires came out, is answering questions, taking phone calls and emails and responding and sending out a second questionnaire because somebody messed up, or, those types of things. So it's a lot of resources to our office. And also these potentially negative impacts on the local economy. If people pull out of the market, there's those jobs. Also the real estate market, I have had some realtors call me and say, they have a deal that might be falling through, or buyers who are kind of just hesitant right now because they want to know if they can rent their property and not have a increase in the tax bill from what they were anticipating. So those are just a few of the impacts. I mean, there's the list goes on about what could potentially happen out of this. Also, if everything was to go commercial, there would be some increased tax capacity to the county. So that's, certainly something that you have to consider, but as of right now, they're not all going commercial. It's just, the highly rented properties. East Bay, I saw a number of them in East Bay that were over that threshold and would likely change to commercial, but when you look at East Bay, it's very similar to a hotel, the way it operates. So, there's some negative impacts and some potential positive impacts out of the memo. The only different course would be a legal solution. Right now, it is what it is. The Department of Revenue guidance stands. It is a directive. It is not just a memo. It's not just a, it wasn't just sent out with no intent. There was certainly intent behind the memo. So what could potentially happen is that the lawmakers create a new tax classification, they modify an existing classification, or some type of special program. I think there is special programs right now in the ag industry where certain counties and jurisdictions can adopt by resolution a special credit or a special classification classification, but, that's obviously much more difficult to get passed through state legislation. If there were a new classification created, it would be a simple solution, easy to develop, easy to implement. It's what's being discussed when Tom Bach and Rob Eklund came in here. That was the first thing that they had talked about. I know there was a radio interview with WTIP in which Tom Bach said he met with the governor and the commissioner of revenue, and they all kind of said that that would be the easy fix, and it's not a Band-Aid, it's a permanent solution. The rates that they would be taxed at could be developed. This is something you'd be completely starting from scratch, so, they could put it at X rate or Y rate, and that's kind of, where they land on that rate, I haven't heard a final number, but that is, obviously going to either make passing this legislation more difficult, or it's, going to be somewhat of where this true middle ground is and be supported by all. You could also, in this process, establish what levies they pay into. I know Tom Bach said he'd like to see them paying into the school referenda, which they currently, under the seasonal recreation class, they don't pay into that. So, that, and also the state general fund, you could say, yes, we want it to, or no, we don't want it to. I mean, when they develop this, they can write it however they want it to read. And it would also, in writing, in statute, establish what exactly fits in this category. So essentially, you could say any property that was found to be advertised as a short-term rental or a vacation rental, and that's pretty simple to understand. We wouldn't get people coming in arguing that, hey, this is our cabin, or hey, this is something else, because it would be defined that advertising, it fits this category. So, couple of points here is it's not real popular with state associations. They've long opposed creating new classifications. I did reread the position statement of AMC and the Association of Assessing Officers. They do not specifically say they oppose creating new classifications. MAAO, which is my Association of Assessing Officers, they say they want to simplify and reduce the number of classifications, but they don't say they're opposed to creating new classifications. They also, if a bill does get pitched down to the state, will review this, and they will take a position either for or against. I went down and did practice testimony in St. Paul last week, which was very interesting. I learned quite a bit. And I do think, for the most part, it's a larger organization that will adopt a bill or support a bill through resolution. It would be something bigger. Counties can do that and send representatives down if they choose to, but it's more typical that it would be from a larger organization like the Association of Assessing Officers or Association of Minnesota Counties that would say, hey, we're for or against this. It could very easily happen that I go down. If I were to go down and testify on behalf of Cook County, you might get the Association of Assessing Officers to come up right behind me and say, we don't support creating new classifications. So how they interpret and take a position on this may affect, what the county, how the county board views it. So, that's just a couple of interesting aspects that get thrown into the mix here.
Can you ask them for your support, for the support of it beforehand?
Essentially, the bill has to be drafted, the final language has to be drafted and sent down to the Senate or the House. And once that happens, our legislative committee on the association will review it. They'll send it out to all the regions. Each chair gets it, and then they distribute it to all the region members. And they come back, and, if there's overwhelming support, they'll take a position for it. And I think if it's kind of a mixed bag, they won't take a position. And if there's overwhelming, people want to reject it, then they would take a position against it. So that's where you might get somebody down to testify for or against from the association.
It's not necessarily reducing it, it's making it more simplified, which is what you're attempting to do.
So I actually, I gave a 2-minute practice testimony, and when I was down there, the majority of people that did their practice testimony, there was representation from all over the state and all kinds of different associations, and most of them were asking for some type of funding. This is presented as relief from a commercial tax classification, but also at the same time, given the historical taxation as seasonal recreational, it is an increase. So it's a little bit of a funky middle ground where, you know, most people are looking at this as, hey, we're saying we should pay a little more tax, or they should pay a little more tax, but at the same time, should it go to commercial? So it is technically relief from the commercial classification. That's the objective, that's the reason this paper was drafted. If there wasn't this imminent commercial classification, this wouldn't even be a discussion, you know, so. Like I say, obviously, given the current situation, many people might decide or modify how they manage their property. I think that's going to be the number one thing that comes out of this first and foremost. In fact, I've talked to some people who said they're going to pull it out for the whole month of January and February, just because those are the lowest prices of the year. So if they can maximize their income, they're going to rent during the busy months. So.
It's kind of sad it's being pitched as a relief, because technically they haven't paid the higher rate yet.
Right. I mean, it could be looked at either way, I guess. The way I wrote my testimony was that, and I'll read the very last paragraph, I say, given the common historical taxation, the Senate bill, which I am here representing the support of X organizations, would result in an increase in property taxes on income-producing properties and will reduce the tax burden on all other types of properties in their district. So it's a middle ground where, yes, it is an increase over the historical taxation, but it is relief from going commercial. So it's unique.
Two things. First of all, could we get a copy of your PowerPoint?
Yes, I can get you a copy of the PowerPoint, and if you'd like, I can also get you a copy of my practice testimony, which, you know, like I say, it was completely drafted as practice. There's nothing in it that has any substance.
Yeah, it's always good to have that. My main question is, when this goes forward, have you tried to figure out or speculate or project what impact this would have on Cook County taxes in regards to who pays what? The pie, you know?
I have, and I will show you a couple examples. I mean, the number of different rates that it could end up on are endless, but I just picked a couple that seem to fit into the, you know, the tree or the hierarchy of taxation.
And especially in light of, you know, that we're facing some kind of decrease in, you know, our assessed valuation because of this advantage we had for this year.
Right, so I can give you a rough estimate on tax capacities based on different rates.
Good, thank you.
So essentially, the new classification, this hypothetical classification would be for CC1 most likely. That would just be adding in that subset of a 4C1 property, which is a seasonal resort. Now, those have a statutory minimum of 3 units. So this would essentially be tagging on, it would be like a cousin to that classification. It would define them as 1 and 2 unit properties. And so it would, the number of statutory requirements that the 4C1 has are significant. That's why a lot of these properties wouldn't fit. You know, a lot of these business operators could look at it and say, well, hey, all we have to do is add 2 more units and we get a lower tax rate. We could rent up to 250 nights and we would have a lower tax rate. But essentially, they wouldn't all fit that category because there's these statutory definition of 40% of lodging receipts in a 90-day window, 60% of bookings have to be for 2 nights or more, 250 days of rental or less. That's what they've written out as defining a seasonal resort. And a lot of these don't fit that category. However, we do have some in town here that were, you know, somewhat recently constructed that do fit that category and will see a lower classification, a lower tax rate. So with this, you know, proposed new classification, it appears to be a middle ground. It essentially would be combining that seasonal recreational term and commercial, so it would be called, you know, seasonal recreational commercial, the same as for C1, but now defining it to have just 1 and 2 units in a subset. The tax capacity rate could be determined, you know, by the interested individuals. We did try to include all parts of this discussion in the conversation. So even Hospitality Minnesota I don't know if they were on the phone call, but they have representation. I've spoke personally with Ben Wogsland from Hospitality Minnesota, and it's an interesting perspective from them because they represent both the resorts and the hotel industry. 3 major resorts here in Cook County that he represents, 300 and some units just in Cook County alone, and they're obviously facing this potential commercial classification. So he does see a need for relief from that, and at the same time, the hotels losing business to this, they want to see an increase, something to help reduce their tax burden. So it's kind of a mixed bag with them. And also now you have, I believe it's Marriott, the hotel corporation is buying vacation rentals and promoting them as lodging. So I think that they're seeing an opportunity here for, revenue. So that's an interesting perspective where, you have the hotel industry saying, hey, this isn't fair, the playing ground isn't level, I'm losing business to them while they pay a lower rate. And you have, everyone from taxpayers and resort owners saying, hey, they should probably pay a little higher rate than seasonal rec. So, under this hypothetical classification, you get to determine what they pay into. If it was subject to the referendum market value, I think that would be wise for them to include in this new classification. Just like a seasonal resort, they pay into the referenda and commercial. And then there would be the state general tax, which there's actually 2 rates for state general. There's commercial, which is about 40%, and then there's seasonal recreational, which is about 17-18%, so almost half of the state general. So seasonal resorts pay into the seasonal rec rate. It's the lower rate, and commercial pays into the higher rate. So they have the option to determine which one of those 2 they should fall into under a new classification when they write the whole language. So this is one example. If this new classification was created at a 1.25% rate, that's the same rate that the residential non-homestead where this 10% increase in the tax capacity came from, was from going to a 1.25 rate from seasonal rec. So essentially, at a 1.25, the county wouldn't lose any tax capacity if this was to pass, or if this was to be proposed and pass legislation. So you can kind of see on the numbers there, $100,000 property is affected a lot more. It's a 50% almost increase in property taxes, whereas the $500,000 and on up would be affected less. At the same time, they would all pay more in taxes, but less than commercial. So that's just kind of an example there of, where a 1.25 rate would fall. Now, this would be as if they did a 1.5% rate. Now, that's the lowest rate in the commercial classifications. It's a tiered system, so as the value increases, the rate goes up. It actually goes up to 2% on anything over $150,000. So this also could be viewed as a middle ground. This would actually result in about, I want to say about a 2 to 2.5% increase on the tax capacity. So even more than what we had gained in that additional 10% of tax capacity from 19, this would add on top of that, which would reduce the burden on all other properties. This, essentially, you could raise the levy over 1% and people's tax bills would remain the same because of new tax capacity. That would be, like you say, increasing the slice of the vacation rental pie from where they're currently at.
Did you say that 1.25 would keep our tax capacity flat?
Yep, it would keep it exactly the same, whereas right now, given that a number of these would switch back to seasonal recreational, we stand to lose some of that.
Yep.
Now, if this were to pass, at 1.25, it would remain the same. At 1.5, we would increase. So that's kind of where looking at the future impacts is, if this is something that the county supports, or MAO supports, or AMC supports, that's one interesting perspective, is because you're essentially gaining revenue from the historical, but also providing relief from that potential commercial classification and managing your business so that you don't hit that commercial classification. I mean, for the most part, I think a lot of these properties, especially the ones valued over $150,000, they will manage it so that they don't go commercial, because the additional income on, let's say 30 nights might not cover that additional commercial tax. So that's a couple of the rates that I developed, and, as far as tax capacities go, I could get you more defined numbers. In fact, I have a spreadsheet, and when you look at the 10% that it went up in 2019, I want to say about 4 to 5% of it was from the vacation rental change. Another 4 to 5% of it was from changing vacant land, from rural vacant land to residential vacant land. If it was platted, we did that because that's state statute, it's supposed to be classified that way. And then you probably had about 1% increase from new construction and stuff. And there was, there's also some value increases and stuff like that that affect tax capacity, but, given that in the 3 prior years, we had 1% increase, and we had 10% increase all of a sudden in 2019, that's pretty significant. And if you guys don't understand how the tax capacity works and affects the levy, I can certainly spend more time with you on that. So, the other options, and this was actually thrown into the mix in that January meeting, is, the group kind of, I guess, determined that maybe it was appropriate for the standalone cabins and houses to go to a new classification, and maybe redefining the existing seasonal resort classification to include all those condos and townhomes that sit on the resort property, and actually to go to that seasonal resort rate, which that would also result in a loss in tax capacity. Not as much as if just those resort units changed over, it would probably be 1% of the tax capacity. And like I say, I can get you more specific numbers, but just off the top of my head, which I've been pretty close in the past, I think if they split those out and treated them differently, it would result in a lower tax capacity for Cook County. So something to definitely consider when you're thinking about this. Essentially what that would be is just rewriting the verbiage in the statute to say this includes individually owned units, condos, and townhomes as part of a resort pool.
Just remind me, when does the commercial class go in effect, if it does? What tax?
Well, those would be any change that, based on my primary use determination, any of the ones that are going commercial are going to go commercial for January 2nd, 2020, for taxes 2021.
Okay.
So, I mean, this year right now, 2020, I don't know if something passed in legislation, if it would go back and apply, because some counties, they lock off their values and classes at the end of January. And it takes time for laws to kick into effect. I mean, not only do you have to, the Senate and the House and everyone pass it, the governor signed it in, now you have to have the software companies program for it. You have to have the assessors make the change. It's not something that, I mean, I know we've talked in the past that this could maybe be retroactive and change for 2020, but I don't know if that's likely.
Just a consideration for us, it's going to impact us on levy.
Right, yeah, for the 2020 assessment, taxes 2021, we are likely to see a decline in the tax capacity.
You're just a ball of positivity.
So, so essentially, that was, for the meeting we had on January 6th was that they had established that it was appropriate to create a new class for the 1 and 2 unit cabins and homes, and to redefine the existing 4C1 class to include those individually owned units at the resorts. So, I mean, you could also look at the residential non-homestead, which is where all of these are classified for 2019, is defining that that's an appropriate class in statute, or like a bed and breakfast, which it has quite a bit of different requirements. The bed and breakfast actually has a 5-unit maximum. You have to be homesteading there, and you also have to serve meals on site, but not to the general public, only to guests. So it's not likely that modifying one of these classes would fly. I think that would be a lot harder to pass down at the state. So essentially that wraps it up. The special programs I talked about, I think that's the least likely option to ever gain traction. It's complex. It would be hard to pass down at the state, then the boards would have to adopt it, the local counties or cities would have to adopt it. And it's certainly not popular with our Association of Assessing Officers because they specifically in their position statement for 2020 have said that they oppose creating special classifications for a small number of properties or special credits like this. So the special program option is there. It's not likely to get much traction down at the state. So if you guys have any questions.
Moving forward, where do we go from here?
So essentially, I'm waiting on the final version of this bill. When that's written up and drafted, I will bring it to one of the board meetings and give you the information. I'll give you the hard numbers. And you guys at that point in time can either make the decision to do nothing. You could, decide you want to wait and see what the Association of Assessors or the Association of Minnesota Counties, how they weigh in on it. Or you could adopt it, you could support it through resolution and ask that somebody go testify.
Okay, so I attended, which I do when I can, not as a board representative, but as an individual, the Cook County Chamber meetings. And there was a resolution that was developed and approved at that meeting that was supposed to come to you, and you've seen it, I guess, or haven't you?
I haven't seen any final version of a proposed bill.
My understanding.
Not a bill, a resolution.
Yeah.
The only resolution I saw was prior to the December 17th meeting where they wanted to put a stop to the change in classifications.
Yeah, we can't do that, I don't think.
Mhm.
So, so my question is, my understanding, and please add in any information that you have that I'm not aware of, is that Senator Bach wanted to have something to a group to submit or work on a proposal for legislation change by the 28th of January. And so in my understanding from what he had indicated, and I heard him say this myself, that it's very important that the county has some kind of resolution of support of a specific kind of proposal. Is that feasible going forward in this kind of timeline?
I think it is. I'm not sure if it was, the discussion I had with the group about, there's a board meeting on the 28th, so I think that's where that deadline came from, is that they would like to, and I'm sure members of the community will come in and speak during public comment to this, but I think that's what the idea was that whatever the final language reads, it would be presented to the board on the 28th for the board to either say, hey, we're going to support this, or, do nothing.
Yeah, and I think the other possibility would be to modify it. And in the current resolution I saw was a 1.25, and you presented a 1.5, which seems to be more feasible.
The board could certainly weigh in on that.
So I think those are the three options, yes.
Right.
So is that something we can do, bring it to the board meeting?
As long as I know what the final language reads, then I can bring it to you and present it to you, and I can give you some numbers, kind of like I did here today, and show you what it means to the county and the levy and the budgets and all that.
So we could get that resolution to us in advance as part of the agenda, and then we could take action at the 28th, I think we should if we can.
Yeah, I think everyone's got their fingers crossed that
Okay.
this will be
All right.
kind of laid out by then.
Okay. Anyone else?
So who's the resolution coming from?
The chamber, and I think it's a result of some kind of meeting on this, and it fits your presentation, I think, to some degree, but...
Yeah, essentially, the role I play in this whole thing is giving the information, the hard numbers, what it means to my office, and those questionnaires, and that whole administrative process of determining primary use, and how we, statewide, I think, as an assessor's organization, we would like something different than that. And also to try and create consistency, clarity, transparency, all those different things. And, like I say, the board has a number of options at that meeting. They can either say, hey, we would like to see a higher rate. They could say, hey, we support this 100%. or they could say, you know, we're going to leave it up to a larger organization to determine if this is right or wrong.
Yep, that's
So,
good.
so just clarifying, so that's the meeting a week from today
Yeah, is that-
is, does the chamber know they're going to send that over to be on an agenda item?
Well, I think you'd have to let them know. I've sort of, the last meeting I had with anyone was that they would work through you.
All right.
I did email this morning, and I got a response from the chamber that they said they were going to get something back, hopefully. They basically said they wanted to wait until after this meeting.
Yeah,
or
and
this
that's logical.
information
So, and just as board chair, I recommended that it goes to Rena, but it could go to you, to Rena, but we'd have to get it in the board
Right.
packet.
meeting. Yep. Right, okay, and apparently it's got to be in tomorrow, so I'm not sure if we'll have the final numbers, but I suppose I can put it on the agenda anyhow.
Or the next meeting is
Or the next meeting.
February 11th.
Right, which, you know, would still be in time before the
Sure.
legislative session,
Sure.
so,
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'll wait for that then.
yeah,
Thank you.
should be an interesting one.
Okay, thank you, Robert. And any more questions? And thanks for all you're doing with this. We're just trying to get a process going here where we can,
Right, I've
Oh, that's a little
learned quite a
bit
bit. I think, you know, none of my 5 brothers and sisters in assessment have gone through this and testified down at the Senate building, and, I mean, that was certainly an interesting experience to kind of see how governments work and how, you know, AMC put it on, so it was very informative. They had representation from sanitary districts and just about everyone.
good, so, go ahead.
I did have a question, I'm sorry. Can you give any specific examples of special programs, just from my perspective?
So the only one that I don't even know where you can find this, but my property tax compliance officer from the Department of Revenue, at one of our regional meetings for the Association of Assessing Officers, he said there was a special program for ag that county boards can adopt. So if the county board sees fit that this statute is beneficial to the local taxpayers, to the county, there's obviously some give and take with a special program. If there was a special program that reduced it from commercial, that would affect all the other taxpayers, but it would benefit these taxpayers. And then also, on the other hand, you have all those, so you have to weigh all the variables, but those special programs, the only one that I've heard of is an agricultural program that has to be adopted by local county boards. I can look into it, and if I find it, I'll send you more research. Otherwise, I'll ask my property tax compliance officer what he was referring to.
Would there be some statute direction in that? And
There would.
and what would the restrictions are, or, yeah, I think that would be important.
There would, and, you know, this might be considered a special program, but in Minneapolis and St. Paul only, there's a statute that says if a landlord doesn't have a rental license, they'll be taxed at a higher non-homestead rate. So that's a special program that I am aware of that exists. I know it's 157 point something, and I can pull it up for you. I have it in a file in my office, but that's kind of going the opposite way. We're saying, you know, hey, if the landlord doesn't have all the, you know, required city licenses, they're going to pay a higher tax rate.
Well, and then the other thing I wanted to ask you about, as long as we're talking about tax classification, this doesn't have nearly the impact that the short-term rental discussion has, but I sit on the Northwoods Food Project board representing the county now, and you know, there's been frustrations with local farmers because they're all very small farms compared to the rest of the state is all ag, basically, with huge farms. Because of our unique geography and geology, it's hard to have 10 contiguous acres of pasture or arable land or whatever. So there was hope that issue might be talked about, whether from Senator Bach or Representative Eklund, or just if you've heard any rumblings about that.
I did get a letter from the Northern Foods Co-op. So I did get a letter from them that they were hoping that they could get some legislation passed on that 10-acre requirement. I know last session, they actually made a 3-acre exception if it's like for ditches, buffers, those types of things. There's now, so 7 intensive acres could qualify. as long as, it's a 10-acre property. If 3 of the acres, up to 3 of the acres are used for like wetland buffers, whatever it might be. So there's definitely some movement on that, and I guess I can see the perspective from farmers up here, because a 10-acre farm, we have very few ag properties. I think we have less than 15 ag properties in Cook County, so, something like that would be significantly beneficial, but I think that the reason why the Association of Assessing Officers hasn't taken that up and supported something like that is because you'd have every residence down in the Twin Cities
Oh, yeah.
claiming that they're a farm.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's hard to navigate how you draw those lines, but.
Commissioner Duker?
I don't know if you can find anything, but I know Betty was trying to work on this situation that he's talking about. At one point, she was trying to work with the group on it and put some language together.
And I'll have to do more research on that special ag program, because maybe something like that would be appropriate for local counties to make a decision on. I think certainly something like that is going to be really hard to pass down at the Senate building, but.
The program, or just in general, or both?
I think in general, I think it would have to, obviously, anytime you try to change a law, you have to show a really good reason why, and, what are the potential impacts? Does this open up Pandora's box to everyone to claim that they're a farm? So those are probably some of the concerns. I'd be more than willing to jump in and look into and work on that with people.
Well, priorities, but thank you.
Right.
Just one clarifying question, do you only have 5 siblings?
No, actually, there's 6 of us, but one's a nurse.
You answered my question. That's pretty strong genetics that you're all assessors.
No,
but
so
one.
my brother teaches some courses for the Department of Revenue, and I've put on a couple of seminars for the vacation rental stuff, and we always start the first slide with a family photo and show of this. So the 7 kids and the mom and dad, all of us were at one point appraisers, and right now, only one of us is not an assessor.
And the nurse is just for triage after you go out and assess properties.
Yeah, right.
Support.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
I have no idea why she decided to be a nurse, but she loves it.
Thank you so much for what you do.
Yep.
And I will look forward to getting this on the agenda for the 28th, possible. Okay, let's go into the last item of our committee of the whole today, and that's
Thank you.
the bylaws process for, I'll turn this over to Molly, but she has submitted information for us to take a look at, and hopefully everyone's read through that. And we can at least discuss some of the feedback we could give her as we move this forward throughout the process. So I'll turn it over to Molly, excuse me. It's been a long meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't have a good sense of how much time commissioners want to spend wordsmithing the bylaws, so hopefully I'll get an idea of that during this meeting. But I have proposed language that I put in your board packet. I have made tweaks to that language even in the time since I put it in the board packet, but nothing significant. And a working draft of these rules is always available to you if you want to just send me a request. I'm not going to publish it every time because it's just such a it's under constant change. But what I suggested is that we go through a couple sections at a time. So today I want to cover a couple parts of the overview. That's section 1. And I want to cover, well, actually, the overview has 2 sections, purpose and statement of principles, and then a couple of minor paragraphs, which I'll just flash up here, but I don't anticipate there would be a lot of comment on them. The purpose section is 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph is the one that I think you should take a look at and make sure you agree with. I'm going to first show you St. Louis County's purpose paragraph. So if you look at your display, I just replaced St. Louis County with Cook County. Desires to conduct its business, perform all its responsibilities and duties in an orderly, efficient, uniform, fair, and lawful manner. That's why we're establishing these rules. We also want the public to have these rules available so that they know what's going to be enforced at meetings and hearings. So that's how St. Louis County describes its purpose. Scott County uses a lot of the same themes, describes itself as a deliberative and legislative assembly, and states its intention that the rules facilitate transaction of business, and then further describes principles. So I took a look at Scott County's language, I took a look at some AMC publications, and I came up with the following language, which I've displayed. The Cook County Board of Commissioners is made up of 5 elected officials who have the responsibility, together as a body, to oversee the operation and administration of Cook County, represent county interests at the state and federal level, and participate in long-range planning and management of the county budget and finances. These rules are intended to facilitate an efficient, fair, and well-reasoned process for fulfilling the board's responsibilities, consistent with law and the fundamentals of parliamentary procedure. Formalization and publication of these rules aid in transparency and clarify for staff and the public the board's intentions and mode of operation. So when I drafted this purpose, I took the text I've seen out there about what the role of a commissioner is, and I kind of incorporated that into purpose for the operating rules. And so does anyone have any questions? Do you want to incorporate anything from the Scott County or St. Louis County or any other language you've seen into the purpose, or does this seem good?
Comments or questions?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job, and I feel like the intentions are all very similar, maybe a little bit different flavor with the language, and I appreciate that.
Anyone else? I think your draft is,
Okay.
I think, more pertinent to what I view, especially with the information from AMC. I think that's more easy to understand for the public, and it's definitely operational for us.
Okay. So after this meeting, I will incorporate these changes, and I'll just publish kind of a final draft of sections 1 and 2 in the board agenda packet for the next meeting, so you can take a look at it all together. And I'll do that every time we work on these. The second paragraph of the purpose is what I have displaying here now, and this I drafted. It's just kind of technical language. Essentially, what we're saying is the specific statute chapters that are most applicable to the rules. We're also stating that these rules can be superseded by state law, by federal law, and that it's not the intention of the board to operate outside of the law. So if you find conflicting law in federal or state law, that law is controlling. So this is just some legal language I'd recommend you include. Any comments or questions on this part?
Okay.
Okay. Section B, subsection B of the overview is statement of principles. I took the introductory sentence directly from Scott County. Operating rules are designed to produce a procedural balance that considers all principles and articulates a specific process by which those principles interact and work. And then specific to Cook County, I think it's a good idea to incorporate our mission, and once we have a vision, our vision. So I've written that these rules are representative of Cook County's mission, supporting community through quality public service. It's my understanding of what our mission is. It's unclear to me the form, like whether the board has officially adopted that or not, but it's
Yep.
on all of our stuff, right?
That one was officially adopted. I would just say that in your, on the last sentence of your slide, I think what you mean to say is insert the vision statement
Yes.
here. Yeah,
Yes, okay.
just for clarification, yeah.
Yeah, that second piece, the county's vision statement, also should be reflected in these rules. I don't have a vision statement to insert there. It should say insert vision statement, just as Rena points out. So I'm suggesting that once we have a vision statement to insert, it would go in there. And that's it for statement of principles. Here's our mission, here's our vision. We're going to try to be consistent with those and how these bylaws read.
Questions, Colin?
I noticed that you haven't included the underlying principles of parliamentary procedure.
So I'm going to go to the next slide to
Yep.
address that.
Oh, different, okay.
Right, this is a difference. So in what I filed with the board packet, I included those parliamentary principles in the purpose, excuse me, in the statement of principles section in that in our introductory sections. I am open to keeping it in the introductory sections. It seems to make more sense in the way I've structured these bylaws to stick it in there later when we talk about the actual rules for meeting procedures. So if you go to the table of contents, that's part of the document in your board packet, you'll see that there's a section 5 called Rules of Procedure. It's up to you. If you want to call this, if you want to list these 10 parliamentary principles in your introduction, you can do that.
I like your logic there,
Okay.
myself.
Doesn't matter to me.
Any other strong opinions on that? Any strong opinions?
Yeah, I like it.
You like it in the later on with the rules of procedure?
No, here.
You like it in the introduction?
I have a question about number 7. A question once decided may not be brought up again. Can you
In the same meeting?
So you can't just keep making the same motion over and over and over again.
Well, it's a question, not a motion.
I think the question, in these principles, the question is a motion. I'm going to call the question,
Okay.
It's a motion.
That's just confusing.
yeah, it's jargon.
These are verbatim from an AMC publication, and we can alter them and just say these are our understanding of principles of parliamentary procedure. I can also, once we get to section 5, where I've suggested we move this language, I can have some different, I don't know, I can maybe flesh out these ideas a little more, and we can wordsmith them.
That's where I'm thinking it needs to belong.
Okay?
What's that in section?
In section 5, where it's explained. Because
What is a question, what's a motion, those kind of things.
Yeah, because having it here and having the 10 items separately, someone can go to this and not go to section 5 and say, what does this mean? Plus, in making the whole document smaller and having less pages.
So where would it go in 5? Under purpose, principles?
Under statement of principles of the rules
Of the rules.
is where I'm suggesting it go.
Okay.
Jenny, what were your thoughts about having it
Well,
in
you
in the first?
you would have the principles right away when you're looking at purpose, and then the purpose of the principles would be stated, expectations would be stated right away, but I can see Molly's point about having it under rules of procedure, too.
I think that's a good preface to the rules and procedure.
So the parliamentary rules part of the operating rules, as in the current structure, comes later, because the operating rules include, it's a larger umbrella, right? It includes the organization of the board, what are the types of meetings we have, what is our committee structure, and it also includes parliamentary procedure. That's kind of why I took it out of the general introductory paragraphs in the beginning, and I'm suggesting we put it down by how do we run a meeting? This is
Which is
really more.
section 5.
Yeah, this is
And
more
I think it would be the
relevant.
top of it, this sort of a prefacing statement to.
There's if you go to section 5 in our table of contents, it starts with
Rules.
statement of purpose of the board, that might be redundant now.
Right.
The statement of principles of the rules would be right up atop of section 5 rules of procedure. And that's where we could put these 10
Okay.
principles.
I think that's reasonable.
I like it.
All right.
These seem like they'd be pretty non-controversial, effective date of the rules, and then availability to the public. In the St. Louis County rules, it says copies of these rules shall be available for public review in the Commissioner's office. That makes sense to me that we should put that right in our rules, especially if transparency is something that we value and one of the reasons we have these rules. So I suggest that we have a copy for public review in the county administrator's office. You would have that along with, the schedule of the regular board meetings that's supposed to be available there. And then that we publish it on the county website. I didn't find that in other bylaws, I just added that myself, so if anyone has an issue with that, we should talk about it now.
Okay.
No comments?
Nope.
Okay.
According to that last page, silence is your response.
Yeah, that's right.
I am a little uncomfortable with that.
Silence is consent.
Yeah, I am a little uncomfortable with that.
Because you're always silent?
No, I'm not comfortable
We'll get
with
to
it.
that in
Oh,
section
yeah.
5.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna think more about that in
Okay.
particular.
Should
but-
be a lively discussion.
There's some silent contemplation.
Meditation is what we need.
Yeah, and
Mindfulness.
thesaurus searching or
Or
something.
chocolate.
Okay, I think I got the order out. I think this is out of order in my PowerPoint, but this is another paragraph from the overview. Amendments to the operating rules. So the way we'd be setting it up in these bylaws is that you review and amend them in the statutory meeting. That's your first meeting every year.
So I made a note of that when I read this. We generally call that our organizational meeting, so maybe we should parenthetically add that or something so that there's not,
Okay.
kind of also known as or something.
I think it makes sense to use the language that we're used to using, so call it the organizational meeting.
Maybe organizational meeting required by statute, I don't know, something like that.
Statutory organizational meeting.
Sure.
And I'm curious, that can be a long meeting, and going through these at that meeting could be problematic, I think, just time-wise. And the fact that at any time we can amend it, I'm wondering the value in,
Well, I think-
just to review and get it in, we're on the same page.
If I could, part of what's in here is how frequently you're going to meet, and some of those other things, which would be changed at the organizational meeting. There is almost an automatic revisiting of it, and several other things, and so there would be some revisiting of it.
And I don't think we'd be reviewing it, it would just be the opportunity to amend.
Well, during the statutory meeting, the county board shall review, amend
Oh,
if
wow,
necessary.
yeah,
and
I don't
adopt
know
them.
about that, thank you.
Oh, it's a good point.
Well, I don't know if we necessarily have to say review, but provide the opportunity to amend. Is that what you're getting at?
I took this language from Scott County. We can change it however you want. I had the same thought, that we already
Yeah, I
pack a
think
lot
the
into that
opportunity to
initial
review
meeting.
and possibly amend.
How about just present?
Well,
Just so if there's a new commissioner, and here are the bylaws.
or continue to, I don't know.
Maybe you could also set it up for the second meeting of the year.
I mean,
That's what I was going to say. Instead of putting it at the organizational meeting, put it at the first business meeting.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
and
That's a good point.
And then maybe it's based on decisions that were made in the first meeting, there might be updates that could be reviewed with the board in that next meeting. And that the administrator will make the proposed updates based on the organizational meeting or something like that.
Usually we have a new chair or a chair continuing at that time as well, with the conduct of that meeting. Okay, Pam. Do you have direction on that?
I
Not
like the
direction, but-
idea of the second meeting of the year, because
Yeah,
then you have
it's a
your
good idea.
new chair, potentially.
Or is that?
Speaking of chairs, we need new chairs in here really badly.
Really?
Yes. You feeling it after sitting there for 5 hours?
I feel it after an hour. I'm sorry, that's off the agenda. So,
We needed to go off.
Molly, could you continue and then,
I was going to ask if we want to say the second meeting or the first meeting, because the
first-
statutory meeting
The
is.
first standard meeting.
Okay, yeah, there we go. I like it.
First regular
Yep,
meeting after
regularly
the organized-
scheduled board meeting?
that's crystal clear, thank you. That's what we're looking for, right?
That's what I said.
Crystal clear, yes.
That's what I said.
These are sharp. Okay, any other feedback from us, Molly?
I'm just going to run this language by you. During the first regular meeting after its statutory organizational meeting, the county board shall review, amend if necessary, and adopt the operating rules for the year. Do you want to allow amendment by majority vote at any time? That's
Yes.
the other language here. And then I have two options here. Those changes shall either be effective immediately upon passage or effective as of the next public meeting.
I think it should be the next meeting.
I agree.
So that take this 5 days out?
No, the 5 days is your notice
Okay.
of
Excellent.
proposed changes. So you should have the opportunity to think about changes. If there's something that's, you also have the option to suspend the rules temporarily, of course, for a specific purpose. So it makes sense to me that changes should come ahead of time and that they should be effective as of the next meeting. Okay. Make a note here. And then you have a third paragraph, or I suppose it's the fourth paragraph in the slide there. Statute references should be current as of the adoption of the operating rules. So I'll have a part in reviewing the operating rules too and making sure that any changes to statute are updated in the rules.
Okay.
And that's it.
All right.
That's all I have to cover.
Was reasonably painless.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your work on this, Attorney Hicken.
Yeah, it's great.
It's well worth the time.
And in the board packet, I suggested a schedule in which we do this in 6 meetings. 4 of them would be work sessions and 2 of them would be regular meetings. So we need to, maybe I should, if you're generally agreeable to that, then I can work with the county administrator to pick the regular meetings that make the most sense for adding these agenda items. And
Which-
if the agenda becomes too packed, maybe we can push it on to the
And
next one.
and I think with the flexibility, that could be modified if we really get bogged down. But a general timeline.
Even if we just made one section at a meeting, if it was a full meeting, it would be good.
Yeah,
Just to
just
keep,
keep making progress.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for the long sit, dialogue, good dialogue, and the goal was to get done by 12 o'clock, and we almost made it, but with that, we'll adjourn.
You got a 1 o'clock?
which, is that close? Did you want to ask something? Oh, you were just
This is
teasing
the
me?
amendment we